My husband, 43M, and I, 44M, have been together 10 years, married 8. We've had a lot of good times, but a lot of rocky ones too. A few years ago, things came to a head, and we nearly divorced, but we got counseling and worked hard on improving our relationship and communication. It was a lot of emotional effort, but it was working and things were getting better. We were finally communicating about our issues, and I was starting to feel emotionally safe and excited for our future together. Until Sunday. Sunday evening, we were chilling in bed when my husband asked to talk and said he had something big to ask me. He started by telling me how much he values our relationship. I've made him feel more loved than he ever has, and it's been soul healing in a way that he hadn't known was possible. But it wasn't enough. One person can't be expected to fulfill all his needs, he tells me, and he needs more. Not wants, needs. So, without consulting me, he'd come up with a plan to open our marriage. He knew of a website that sounded interesting, and he wanted to sign up. He'd find a new guy, and they'd go out once a week. I asked him if he's looking for something physical or emotional. He told me it's mostly emotional, but would have physical attributes too. He had ideas of what he wanted, but he didn't know what the other guy would want, so he'd have to find out. I asked him if he had someone in mind. He listed a few people he was attracted to, but said they wouldn't be available. I was informed I would still be his primary partner, and I'd also be free to seek outside of the relationship to meet my needs. I can't forget the excitement in his voice and the light in his eyes as he talked all about it, while my world imploded. This is not what I signed up for. He presented himself from the beginning as monogamous, as did I. I don't object to open relationships, but it's not what I want personally, and I thought he knew that. I also didn't sign up to be his punching bag. I can't forget lying there, feeling worthless after being told I was inadequate and was unable to measure up, feeling like our relationship was a gigantic bait and switch, and that the new precious feeling of emotional safety was gone, possibly forever. Because this isn't the first time he's communicated his needs in a way that hurt me, or the second. It's happened over and over. It's why we nearly divorced. We've spent yesterday and today trying to work through this. We have some ideas, but I'm not willing to implement them until I feel safe. This is where we reached an impasse. His thinks that he's communicating the best way he knows how, but it's difficult because we're both autistic, and my expectations are very high. He says I have RSD. So these kinds of misunderstandings are unavoidable. My side is that this incident is part of a larger pattern which is emotionally abusive, and I'm not obligated to put up with it no matter his reasons. I feel he needs to take the initiative and learn how to communicate his needs, without harming me any more than necessary. I also want to throw this in because I think it's relevant. In the last 6 months or so, he doesn't look at me the way he used to. He's updated his style to look younger, and he's gotten into the best shape I've ever seen him in. He looks fantastic. Would you lovely people share your thoughts, please? Update 1. We talked about the open marriage, and I told him I did not want that because it's just a slow divorce. He decided I was right and said he didn't want to open it anymore. There was no apology for telling me I was inadequate. After talking a bit, we got down to the real problem. He wanted to go back to the DDLB, Dom Dad Little Boy, play that we had done extensively during our early marriage, until he'd gotten to be such a brat that I'd threatened to divorce him. We'd continued in a limited fashion, but I no longer felt safe as his daddy and my heart wasn't in it anymore. I asked him lots of questions to find out specifically what he wanted, and it was a repeat of our early marriage. Extra love and attention, no responsibility, no accountability. It was not to be role play for brief periods of time, but a semi-permanent state. He was so excited talking about it, right up until I asked him how we would ensure that the toxic patterns that happened in our early marriage didn't happen again. He had no interest in talking about that beyond diagnosing me with RSD, i.e., calling me crazy. It was enlightening that someone who was asking for so much would offer so little in return. I told him I wanted to pause all power dynamics we'd been doing. There would be no more DDLB play until we could meet as equals. I asked him for suggestions to make that happen. He had none. I came up with the idea of writing a marriage contract that specified our responsibilities. We also started marriage counseling. Things were okay-ish for a few months. His birthday was in November, and I made an exception on DDLB and took care of him all day. Let him get as fucked up as he wanted, dressed him, took him to the store for snacks, drove him 6 hours to our destination, got us checked in, gave him a chastity cage, he'd asked for one, and locked it on him for a bit. Played games, some very childish, some very adult LOL, until it was time to head to our concert, navigated there, hung out, took him for treats, navigated back. His only responsibility was to hold my hand so he didn't get lost. We had a good time. He was very happy. In the weeks after his birthday, he wanted to build up his endurance on how long he could have the cage on, and kept asking me to lock him up, unlock him. At first it was just for an hour or so, but it soon got to the point where I was his de facto key holder, and he was locked up for days at a time. I didn't like that a power dynamic was forming, so I did what he'd done when asked to be my key holder, acted obviously uninterested until he stopped asking. I didn't want to shut it down any harder, as I didn't want to ruin the present. A month later, life gave me another crisis. My son, 14M, had been SA'd by a peer, and his mental health had tanked to the point of self-harm and near-constant thoughts of unaliving himself. His mom and I were trying to support him, but when we tried to talk about it, he would just smile and say there were no problems. But there were. Everything came to a head in December when his counselor pulled me in and told me, get him into a facility before it was too late. At the same time, my husband wanted to relitigate a fight we'd had 3 years before, when I'd blown up at him after he'd repeatedly bullied me. He was seeking assurance that I would always be respectful and never get angry, no matter how he acted. That didn't seem right, so I resisted, and he accused me of lacking empathy. When I asked him specifically what empathy he wanted, he described me being his therapist. He wanted me to sit him down and run him through the confrontation, ask him about his feelings, be objective, etc. I spent a day and a half thinking about the best way to answer him before realizing that I simply did not have it in me right then. I was worried sick for my son and was coming to seriously resent my husband taking up all my emotional energy. Also, I felt that it wasn't my responsibility nor priority to be his therapist right then. So, for the first time, I cited our marriage contract. I told him that he'd brought up this same discussion 2 months before, and I'd told him I wasn't willing to talk about it until our contract was well established, and that him asking me again when I told him no and why, and we had not met the terms, was a violation. In the contract, it specified that when either of us believes there is a violation, all discussion stops until we mutually agree the problem is resolved. He didn't do that. Instead, he immediately pivoted back to his point. So I cited the contract again, this time for violating the violation rules. He admitted to that violation, so I collected the penalty kiss. He was supposed to be the one to do it, but he just stood there, so I did. Then we went back to the first violation, him asking me for something I'd said no to. Apparently me saying no was not sufficient, I needed to ask him. So I did. I asked him to wait until our contract was established and trust restored. He got pushy. How long? At least 6 months. 6 months from the contract date or now. Marriage contract date. Why? Every time I tell him no, he asks why. Because we have different understandings of empathy. I did my best to answer his questions, but he was unsatisfied and gave me a hard deadline of April to step up or he would leave me. Based on how little time he took to consider his words, I was 90% sure he didn't mean it, and was willing to gamble on the other 10%. I genuinely wanted him to go away and let me focus on my son, so I called him out on giving me an ultimatum, and he insisted that it wasn't an ultimatum, just him clearly communicating where he's at. I again called him out on giving me an ultimatum, and he told me that ultimatums are controlling, and he's not a controlling person, so it's a boundary. I disagreed and defined both a boundary and an ultimatum for him. He asked for my source. I said it didn't matter, as he was clearly going to do it either way. He doubled and tripled down on where he's at. He then got huffy, insisted his definition of a boundary versus an ultimatum was more pertinent than mine, while also admitting he didn't actually know the difference, and ended the discussion as it had become unproductive. He left it there for 5 days. Then I reached out to him and told him in no uncertain terms that I would not be obeying him now, or in April, and asked where he wanted to go from here. And guess what? I was right. Where he's at was not in fact where he was at. He wanted to go back to the rules. You know, the ones he broke the first time I cited them. He wanted to sweep everything under the rug like it didn't happen. I told him I was no longer interested in that, and wanted to accept his request to open our marriage. He asked if this was really just a slow divorce, and I confirmed that it was. He asked me to reconsider. I told him the trust is broken. I'm tired of repeating these cycles. I'm no longer willing to do marriage counseling. I think we'd do better as friends, and I wanted to permanently downgrade our marriage to a situationship. He countered and suggested we move to a situationship for 6 months, then reassess. which I accepted. We're now on month 5 of 6. My 45th birthday was during the first month. I celebrated alone in Vegas and cried myself to sleep. When he started talking about Valentine's Day, I told him I didn't want to celebrate it. He asked why, of course, and when I told him it felt weird, he downgraded us to just friends. Didn't want me to touch him anymore. I had no problem with that, too checked out, which I think surprised him. That lasted about a month before he wanted benefits again. That's where we're at now. As for my son, he's doing much better. We celebrated Christmas in the mental institution's visitor room. That'll be one for the ages. He's out now and has been doing intensive therapy, and it's making a huge difference. He's learned so much, and we're actually communicating. It's amazing. I'd love thoughts, ideas, or support. I feel really alone. Edit. Isolation is the worst enemy for recovery. It's time to reach out to family and friends for support. You should also start new hobbies that involve being in contact with other people in person to keep your mind occupied. I don't know if you enjoy being in nature, but you could consider joining some hiking groups. It can help clear your mind, allow you to travel, and meet other people in similar situations to yours.